Hi, my name is Jeff Brand. I'm the Dean at the University of San Francisco School of Law. Next year, the academic year 2012-2013, the law school celebrates its centennial. As part of the centennial celebration, we've been documenting the long storied history of the law school and the university. And today, I'm proud to be interviewing Noel Dyer, class of 1939, graduating on the eve of World War II, and our oldest living alum, and we couldn't be more honored than to have Noel here to talk about his recollections of the law school and perhaps give us some insights that can help us as we approach our second century. So Noel, welcome.
Well,
thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Dean. I entered the law school with the class of 1939. In 1936, the law school then was conducted in Campion Hall across the street, and Kendrick Hall did not exist. Charles Kinane, Kinnane, was dean, and he remained dean for 3 years. We went through that time, and out of a class of about 30 or 35, we graduated 7. Out of that 7, there were Tom Mahoney and George Cronin, among others. And I want to mention Tom Mahoney, who became an officer during the war that came in on a few years after we graduated. But Tom became an officer in the Marine, and I went into the Navy. Tom went to Iwo Jima in the invasion of the Japanese and was killed there. And we had a memorial for him. I thought I would mention that because of the great sacrifice that Tom made. He was a good student at USF. He was a graduate, and he was, in addition, I might add, a very good rugby and soccer player.
Well, on that note of heroism and remembering back, and you're talking about having celebrated him after his untimely death, let's move forward and just talk about where you are now, your family. Where are you living? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I'm living in San Francisco. I was born here, as was my wife. I live on Russian Hill here in San Francisco, and I'm now retired and have been for the last several years. Shortly after law school, I practiced for a few months with George Cronin, who became a partner in the Brobeck firm, and with Tom Mahoney. But then I went with the Pillsbury firm that was then Pillsbury, Madison, and Sutro. It was a firm with one office in the Standard Oil Building, San Francisco, had 40 lawyers. I did rather minor work for some time, but later on litigated a good number of cases. One of them involved, for instance, the pipeline system of the Standard Oil Company. The Public Utilities Commission, or the legislature at that time, wanted to make it a public utility, and they brought a proceeding before the Public Utilities Commission, which I defended. We won that case because the proceeding to have us declared a public utility was dropped. There were various other matters. For instance, we represented IBM. They have a big establishment on Tuttle Road in San Jose where a lot of their people work. And they develop a lot of the devices that have extremely small tolerances and dimensions. And the competitor electronic companies, it was very important that they know what was going on in the IBM laboratories, because their devices had to be compatible with the mainframe IBM. They had to be plug compatible. So we had these people that would hire our engineers promise them a lot and get them to, in effect, copy what they were doing in the IBM laboratory. I remember we were in federal court in San Francisco, and we had brought this action against one of the competitors, and we had our plans there, our outline, and we had subpoenaed their plans, and the dimensions that had to be compatible were in the millionths of an inch, the tolerances and dimensions. And I remember I pointed out the tolerance that they had on their plan, which was, say, 0.0057896. It wasn't that, but it was in about 7 or 8 dimensions. Ours was precisely the same. It was an overlay. And I said to the engineer for the competitor, here are these 2 dimensions, they're exactly the same. Where did you get it? And his lawyer said, I instruct them not to answer. And I was shocked at that, because that, of course, is in the Constitution, but it's used almost always in criminal cases. And I said to him, I said, counsel, this is a civil case. He says, I know it. And I looked at him, I says, I have no further questions of this witness. Because in effect, he was admitting that if he answered, he'd be subject to criminal prosecution.
And this was all during your time at Pillsbury. So you graduated in 1939, and after that, you had a short stint elsewhere, but then went to Pillsbury.
Remained with him, except for the war years when I was in the Navy for 3.5 years.
But you stayed with Pillsbury your entire legal career.
That's right.
When we were talking before, you told me a story about the 6 people that you came to Pillsbury with who were hired with you.
Yes.
Can you repeat that story? It's I think very instructive about U.S.
I went to Pillsbury in 1940. I think it was February or March in 1940. And they had hired for that year two lawyers that had graduated from Harvard Law School, one from Cornell and one from Bulls Hall of UC. And they all went various different other places. I'd stayed there, but I was the only one that made partner. I don't say they were very able, and I don't want to downgrade them. I'm just saying that was the situation
Well, the
that
difference
existed.
with them and you was
Yeah.
they didn't have the benefit of a USF education.
Well, happily that proved to be the case.
Let me ask you this, Noel. You go to law school, living here in the city. What made you interested in law to begin with?
Well, as I thought I previously said, I went to a high school, Orta St. Ignatius, where they emphasized good, solid subjects, mathematics and speaking and so forth. I got by in math, but I wasn't that great. But I spoke pretty well. I edited the paper, did other things that required expression in writing and speaking. And finally, when I got into college, I realized that if I was going to go further, I ought to go into areas that I had some competence in.
And so law you thought might be
So that's
that
why
area.
I started in the law school.
And when you started in the law school, it was housed where? In Campion Hall, where it had been,
It was Campion Hall. It was the top floor of Campion Hall. The library was up there, and we got a good education there.
Tell me about your class. What do you men, women, size?
We had to start out with. We had about 35 people in the class. In retrospect, unhappily, we had no ladies in the class. There was one lady in the whole law school, Ellen Clasby. Now I understand they had a majority, and I think that's a happy circumstance. In any event, we got a good education. I'm sure the curricula now is different. For instance, one subject we got was just pleading. You know, you learn things about trespass quare clausum fregit. I don't know I don't know what good that ever did
You
me
didn't
in
know
the
then,
practice.
you don't now.
I don't know what good that ever did me in the practice of law, but certainly it added to one's education.
Who was
I'm-
your, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Who was your favorite professor in the law school?
Well, I think either Joe Sullivan or J. Brent Bodfish. Bodfish was from the East. He was a sort of a straight-laced fellow, but a very fine professor. And we had others that were good. We had some adjunct professors that were good. For instance, I took a course in bankruptcy, and there was a lawyer, a practicing lawyer, named August Rothschild. He was good.
What makes a good professor in your mind? What were you looking for then?
Well, I was looking, of course, competence in the subject, and also an ability to do some exposition of that subject, and so that the young people before him could understand what was being said. And I think a lot of our professors were able to do that. Some, of course, I felt were much better than others, but I'm sure that exists today and exists in a lot of law schools.
And how about your favorite subject? What was your favorite subject in law school?
I think it was evidence.
And why is that?
Well, because I used it so much later on in practice, I think, among other things. And it was a subject that I could understand, and I remember we had an evidence book. It was written by a professor from Chicago. Wigmore, I think, was his name.
And which became the standard,
The standard
Bible
book,
in
yeah.
evidence, of course.
Yeah, and I got into a lot of different areas of the practice. I did quite a bit of water law, riparian rights. For instance, I was hired by Lake County because of the levels of Clear Lake. It was going down, and the water was being taken down by some farmers in the lower areas of Sacramento Valley, and that went through various court proceedings.
Were these subjects you had taken in law school?
Water rights was not. You more or less, I don't know that there were many law schools were teaching that subject then.
So like today, you learned a lot on the job.
But that was an interesting subject, and it evoked various emotions among the clients, because if you have a farmer or a manufacturing outfit that needed the water, and some lower riparian owner was taking, some upper riparian owner was taking it, and he wasn't getting it, that gave rise to a lot of emotion.
Well, let me ask you this, staying with your law school experience for a moment. Do you remember anything about law school that was particularly inspiring to you? Great moments in your legal education?
Well, I think, yes, I think the lectures that we were given were very good. I think Joe Sullivan, that taught contract, he was a very down-to-earth professor, and what he said gave me a lot of comfort that maybe I could handle that sort of stuff.
And what about issues that you had with your legal education? Were there complaints that you had with the time, criticisms you had of the law school, things we could have done better?
I never had any particular criticisms. I got along pretty well. I know I took a course in sales, and I couldn't make the examination time because of some out-of-school requirements. And I came back, and finally I got persuaded them to give me a second examination, and that got pretty a matter of concern to me at that time.
Well, and of course you know now that cost of legal education is a major concern. How much did you pay, Noel, to go to law school?
I think it was about $15, $25 a month.
And was that a lot of money to you at the time?
That was a lot of money to me. My father died when I was 12 years old, and I was pretty much on my own after that. I worked at various jobs and did various things. among other things, I used to do some public speaking for candidates. People would run for Congress, or they would run for supervisor or something like that. And I didn't necessarily believe in what I was talking, believe me, but I used to I used to talk at these various political gatherings, and I'd make $100 or maybe more than that, and that kind of thing helped me along.
Oh, that's great.
And but I was always able to do fairly well in law school. I think I came out second. We had another fellow named Jerry Finn who was very, very bright, and I used to wish I was as bright as he was, but I wasn't.
Well, apparently you did quite well, and
I
your
did all right,
distinguished
yeah.
legal career testifies to that.
And so that's it.
So you graduate from law school, you made good friends in law school, you talked about George Cronin, you talked about Mr. Mahoney. Other classmates that you then practiced with that you recall?
No, not in law school, because we didn't have that many of them. But there were some very good people that were either in my class or in other classes close to mine. One of the people who was maybe 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years older than I, he was at the time, but I knew him very, very well, was Raymond Sullivan. And he was with the firm Malone and Sullivan. And later on, I think he went on the Supreme Court. I know he was on the
Absolutely.
appellate court.
He was on
And
the
he was
Supreme
from
Court.
USF, and he was a very bright, a very, very good guy to know. And then there was Ned Burns. He's passed away, but he was a very, very able trial lawyer. And then, of course, there was Tom O'Connor. Tom O'Connor was the city attorney of San Francisco, and he did very well.
And then a few years into your practice with Pillsbury, you head off to World War II.
I went off to World War II. I remember I was doing a lot of work in the firm at the time, and the war came on, and I thought I should apply to the Navy, and I applied to the Navy, and I finally got a notice that I should be at Naval Training School in Tucson, Arizona the following Monday morning, and it was then Friday. And I had a lot of things on my desk that I'm not sure I knew the answer to. And I came back and I got rid of all of that stuff and told one of the senior partners I'm leaving. And I think he wanted to cut my throat, but I had to leave.
And did you actually see combat in World War II?
No, but close to it. I was on a staff, Operational Command Pacific Fleet. We used to train combat ships, and we used to have to ride with them. I remember we had a submarine that was with us, and they were, one time, they were streaming a gizmo called a sound buoy. This is something that the submariners pinged on to determine where the submarine would be. Well, the submarine went down, and when they got down 100 or 200 feet and counted noses, there were 3 men gone, and we never found them. At that time, I had been out of law school maybe 7 or 10 years, and the admiral that was, rather the chief of staff, that was head of the group I was with, he knew I was a lawyer, and I was the only lawyer on the staff. And I don't know how I viewed that, but I knew I was getting a lot of extra duty. So we got this order at 7 o'clock in the morning, instituting a court of inquiry under Naval Courts and Boards, which is a sort of a Bible of the Navy for their legal proceedings. And it ordered that the court of inquiry, which consisted of 2 senior officers and me, and I was a junior officer at the time, called the judge advocate, which meant that I did all the work and took all the guff. We were ordered to conduct a court of inquiry and inquire into the failure of the high-pressure main engine turbine of the USS Block Island. So I got these two senior officers, and we went down the stream, and I went aboard this ship, and it was an aircraft carrier. So I said to the OOD, the officer of the deck, "Where is this high-pressure turbine?" He says, "Follow me." We went all the way down these ladders, umpteen ladders, and hit this thing that looked half as big as a house on chains and people crawling around it. And he says, "There it is, Lieutenant." Wow. And the court was starting.
So you're using your legal skills even in the Navy?
Well, I'll say this briefly because I don't want to get into it too long. But I knew that on our staff there was a warrant officer, a very experienced naval man named Skonecki. And I got on the phone and said to Skonecki, I said, "Ski, I've got this thing about this high-pressure turbine. What do we do?" He says, "Lieutenant," he says, "there's a book." He says, "This MEI, Mechanical Engineering Instructions." He says, "It's got everything in it that the Navy knows about high-pressure turbines." I said, "Ski, get in the boat and come over." So he came over, and for the next 2 weeks, he sat by me in the wardroom while I questioned all these officers and reading the book and then doing my questioning, and we got by with it. And it was accepted, although the captain of that ship was damn mad at me for saying some of the things I said in it.
So then you leave the Navy and you return to Pillsbury.
Right.
But in addition to your career, you always have been involved either with the university or the law school or your community. What were some of the things that you were doing outside of your practice, either related to the university or not?
Well, I don't know. I used to do various things. I was interested in the school paper, and I used to help people with that. I was the editor of something called the Foghorn when I was here.
Mm-hmm. Which is
and
still
after I
today.
was out, I used to get questions from them. Larry Fanning became the general manager of the Chronicle, and I used to talk to him about a lot of things on that and things of that nature. And it wasn't anything that was particularly focused in any one directions, but from time to time we did get requests to do this or do that, and we did them.
But you also were general counsel or helped the university with their legal
Yes, I was
affairs
counsel
some
for the
time.
I was counsel for the university. I told you about the heaven and hell case. Did I tell you
I'm
about
not
that?
sure.
Well,
I think I would remember it. So I think the answer is no.
Well, there was Vincent Hallinan was a alumnus of the
A
university.
very distinguished and sometimes controversial alumnus.
And he had this, there was this man named Supple who was an alumnus of the university that made a bequest that was made in his will that said that he got a good Christian education at USF and he wanted to support that the best he could, and thus he was making this bequest. Well, Hallinan found out about that. He disagreed with that. He said that heaven and hell was simply a figment of the imaginations of prehistoric men, and he was going to set the bequest aside. So he sued us, and I defended the case along with others, but I defended the case. We went to hearing, and of course, as I indicated before, there's this constitutional provision that says that people have a right to believe in what they believe in. And we won without much problem in the lower court. And Hallinan, believe it or not, brought it up to the Court of Appeal. And we had an argument before the Court of Appeal. And I remember the presiding justice said, "Well, Mr. Hallinan," he says, "here is this provision that there is a freedom of religion. And he says, in addition, he said, there is these unanimous Supreme Court decisions that say people can believe what they want to believe. And that seems to be one of the central issues in this case." And Hallinan says, "Well," he says, "Your Honor," he says, "I came here because I think it's high time that somebody told them they're wrong." I thought, we're in the Court of Appeal and he's talking about the Supreme Court. I don't have any problems with this case.
Let me change the topic a little bit, Noel. Your partner, George Cronin, or your classmate,
Yeah.
helped to found our Board of Counselors, which still exists today.
Yeah.
Were you involved with the boards of the
Yes,
law school?
I was on
And
the.
what were the issues that were involved when you were on the board?
Oh.
You were on the Board of Counselors.
Yes, I was on the Board of Counselors for maybe 10 years. I was also for a while the president of the Law Society.
Right.
Well, there were
What
there
kind
were
of-
various issues involving the support of the law school. Usually there'd be maybe a drive for funds or things of that nature. Usually that was maybe the most prominent things, and then there were issues maybe involving the faculty or some of the students. I frankly don't remember any of them too clearly now, but I know that they were there.
Well, that's good, because that means they probably got resolved
They
in
got
a way
resolved,
that was okay. Let me ask you some questions looking back. Okay, let's look back first at the legal profession. Over time, how did the legal profession change from when you were a young lawyer, young associate at Pillsbury, till the time that you retired? What were the big changes, if any, that you saw?
Well, number one, there are a lot more lawyers now. When I went with our firm, we were the largest firm in San Francisco, and there were 40 lawyers. 30 years from then, with various mergers, I think we have 11 or 12 offices: London, New York, Tokyo, Sydney, Australia, and I think about 600 lawyers.
And how did
And
that-
you have to deal with them, all of that sort of thing. There's much more specialization now. People nowadays, if they want to become antitrust lawyers and antitrust litigators, they pretty much remain antitrust litigators.
Mm-hmm.
Then I used to try water cases involving intellectual property. I tried a lot of litigation before the Public Utilities Commission and before the Federal Communications Commission in Washington, D.C. You had to be expert. I tried a case involving Trans World Airlines. Trans World Airlines had an agreement with the city and county of San Francisco that set the landing rates for the airplanes. Well, later on,
So you had to be an expert in that too.
you had to be an expert in that too.
Let me ask you this: you retired in what year?
I think it was 78.
Okay, and you'd started practicing 1939,
Right.
40. Okay, so it's 38 years later. Did you enjoy the practice of law as much in 1978 as you did in 1940?
Yes,
Why?
because I was a lot more relaxed then. I knew what was going on more. When I first started, I was more concerned with the competition that was in the firm. There was a lot of young lawyers, and I knew a lot of us weren't going to last. And also, realistically, when you got on, the question arose, are you going to make partner?
So that was over. That anxiety was gone.
That anxiety was over.
Well, let me ask you this: since 1978, as you've watched more from the sidelines, not as a practicing attorney, what are your impressions of legal practice now? Do you have concerns about where things are at, or things that you see that are better?
Well, I do have concerns that young lawyers are going to be able to establish themselves and get along. And that hasn't anything to do with the merits of the individual or the merits of the school they went to. I saw the other day that some law school, not this one, was reducing its personnel because of the lack of opportunity. I don't know anything about that personally, but personally it gives me a concern.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that's an ongoing thing.
Well, I'm
But
glad
we
you-
had that concern when I first started, and you go along. But law, I'm sure, it's a competitive business. If you get into the courtroom, there's no place more competitive than that.
Yeah. Well, let's now, I appreciate those comments about the profession, and I appreciate your noting the competitive environment today, because we have wonderful students here, but they are concerned about jobs and what's
Right.
available.
Right.
Let's look back now at the university. If you had to characterize or talk about what the mission of the university and the law school is, what its real purpose is, what would you say?
I think it is to uphold the standards, the professional standards of the lawyers. I think it's their duty to obey the requirements of the law and of the courts. And I think it's their job to work as hard as they can to represent their clients and do what they can, and ethically to win their cases.
You know, it's funny because we're going to celebrate now 100 years of the law school.
Right.
The university has now celebrated its 150th anniversary 7 years ago. And I think that no matter how much change we've experienced, what you just articulated is the same good statement about what this university and what this law school is all about.
Right, right.
In terms of your own practice and your own life, how do you think that has matched up with the ideals that you just articulated?
Oh, I think so. I think it's matched up pretty well. Certainly, the firm has never required me to do anything that would be contrary to legal ethics or certainly to the statutes. As a matter of fact, if I had gone off the deep end on that, I certainly would have heard about it and may have been separated from the firm. We have had, as all firms have had, very few situations where a lawyer, for one reason or another, got himself into some difficulty, ethical or otherwise, and said to him, "Sorry, but we don't practice that way."
Do you remember any time in your legal career when you had a client and you said to that client, ethically you cannot do what you're proposing to do?
Well, yes. When you're trying cases, you talk to the witnesses, sometimes out of court, usually before you put them on. You're trying to find out what they're going to say and so forth. I have to be careful what I'm going to say, but I had problems over the years when I was in litigation with witnesses who were advertising people or gung-ho salesmen. I've had people say to me, salesmen say to me, after I went through something with them, say, "Okay, Noel or Mr. Dyer, don't worry about it. Just tell me what you want me to say and I'll say it." And I used to think to myself, my God, if I follow that, I'm going to be in jail.
And what,
No?
I'm sorry, please go ahead.
And I wouldn't get along. Now that didn't happen very often or at all, but overall, it's had to happen very few times. I did a lot of medical work, a lot of medical litigation. I represented Park Davis, the pharmacologist, for instance, particularly with chloromycetin, and that was in Time magazine, full page.
And was there an ethical issue that arose out of that?
Well, yes, because there was a question there of what the doctors were going to say, and I had some problems there, but not very much.
Let me ask you this: you have this strong ethical sense, obviously, with the way you're talking. Do you think your legal education played a role in developing that ethical
yes,
instinct?
of course. Well, I mean, in undergraduate work, for instance, we had to take a course in ethics, and that was it. And also there was a course in the law school curricula at the time. It was taught by Bill Schaefer. It was legal ethics.
And that influenced your practice?
Yes, of course. And we had to pass that course if you were going to graduate.
Well, of course, now looking at today and being here as we are in Kendrick Hall in 2012, students are experiencing difficulty, as I mentioned, about jobs, and there's a lot of stress given the economy and all of these problems. What advice would you give to today's students as they face anxiety and difficulty, much as you did in 1940?
Well, I think all they can do is to keep on plugging, keep their spirits up, and to try to make the best approach they can to the various lawyers that they talk to and deal with. It's a very, very tough situation, but and of course, a lot of these young lawyers are going to have to go out and practice on their own with 2 or 3 other people. That was not at all uncommon when I got out at school. There was the big firms in those days, they preferred, no question about it, they preferred some lawyers from Harvard or Yale or Cornell. And it was tough to get in there. But when you got in, this education we had here supported us, and we were able to contest against them and to do well, and a lot of them did.
You know, we're going to freeze that moment on this tape because I think all of our students today would really benefit from hearing those words of encouragement and wisdom, and your plea to them to be patient and to be creative and have stamina.
Right. The big firms, you know, they have large clients and large affairs. For instance, you take a utility company. I used to try these rate cases before the Federal Communications Commission or the Public Utilities Commission. You take the telephone company. If you have a serious injury cases brought into the telephone company, the man in charge of that department, he's going to be concerned about it, but you know, it's just another item that comes in every day. If it's a rate case, which has subject matter as dry as dust, that head of that department, plus the head of the regulatory department, plus the vice president of the telephone company, is going to be in the conference room with you, and they're going to go over the thing, and they're going to want to dot the I's and cross the T's, because what they're dealing with is the rates to the people, and that's hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right. Well, our time is drawing close to the end here, but I want to ask you something. Just as you look at legal education today, what surprises you the most about it?
There's so many people in it.
The size of it.
The size of it.
Because those 35 folks.
Well, I showed you a picture today of the class of 1920 that I happened to have in my records because of a relative I knew that was in that class. There were in 1920 USF Law School. I have the picture. Graduated 13 students.
Right, and I might note that they were 13 males.
13 males, all males. They were all males when with the exception of one, when I was in law school.
Yeah. And of course, things have changed dramatically for the better today. Yeah. Let me ask you this: looking now at the practice of law, not legal education, what surprises you the most about the practice of law today?
That is so large and so diverse, has so many lawyers in it, and deals with so many entities and with so many businesses. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, and let me end on something that I know is the most important thing of all, your family. Because what we haven't heard from you is, you know, how long have you been married? How many kids? Talk about that just for a minute.
Well, I live in San Francisco with my wife, who also was born in San Francisco. My grandparents came to San Francisco many years ago. I have two sons, Paul and Larry. One son goes to USF. No, he did go to USF. He was a graduate, the undergraduate. And the other lad graduated from Santa Clara. He was a hospital administrator of a very, very large hospital.
And they have children too?
What's that?
They have children also?
They have, Larry has one, and Paul has three, one of them adopted. And they're good kids. And as a grandfather, as a matter of fact, I got notice the other day that for the first time I became a great-grandfather.
Oh.
And his name is Milo. You know, my father died when I was 12 or 13 years old. I never saw my grandparents because they practically all predeceased me. Unhappily, my grandfather, Maurice Nugent, was murdered. He was unhappy. Unhappily, he was an innocent victim on the street. And my mother raised us with 4 children and no husband because he died when I was 11 or 12 years old. Yeah. And I told you I did a lot of things on that, but I got by. I had a good time in college. I was the editor of the paper. I was a valedictorian of the class, all that stuff. And you know, I can wring my hands and say, oh, it was bad for me. But you know, despite the fact that I didn't have the family backup that I might have had, I got along. And you got along because I think you had a optimistic outlook. And you did what you can, and you did what you can. And I did well in my studies, not as well as a few above me. And I had a very, very good time.
Well, you know, I think again for our students today, you've really capsulized: enjoy life, work hard,
right,
have patience,
right,
a little bit of luck, and
right,
things can turn out wonderfully. I have one last question for you, Noel, that you can answer with a number. What's your next birthday?
I'm what?
Your next birthday. What number is it?
98.
98 years old. Well, I think that inspirational number is a good place to end.
I was born on Christmas Day.
Born on Christmas Day in 1913. Well, I want to thank Noel Dyer for joining us for what I think was an inspiring interview with lots of lessons for the future as he looked back into a long, long distinguished past. Noel, thank you for being with us.
Good.
And we
Thank
look
you very
forward
much.
to your
Okay.
wife, your kids,
Yeah.
your grandkids, and your great-grandkids joining us for all of the centennial events next year.
I hope so.
Thank you, Noel.